and welcome to today's episode of The Man Who Knows Everything, here live on Ingestry Hall Residential Arts Centre's Facebook page. The Man Who Knows Everything, that is me, I am he, and the way that this works is every weekday at 1 o'clock I come on here and I give all of our viewers a topic to research for the next 24 hours so they can come on the next day and check off their facts against my facts. And at the end of it, if you've got a fact that I don't give, then you've technically beaten the man who knows everything. But as I always say, there are only facts I don't say rather than facts I don't know. So yesterday's topic was all about World War II, 10 facts about World War II in honour of VE Day, the previous Friday. And then we mentioned a bit the fact that the roles of women changed after World War II, particularly in the eyes of society. There was a bit of a change in World War I as well, but I'll come on to that a little bit later on. And so, inspired by that, today's topic is the women's suffrage movement. So here are my 10 facts about women's suffrage. So fact number one is the fact that the word suffrage means having the right to vote in political elections. So suffrage is being able to vote in elections, and back in the day women were allowed to vote at all. It was just men over a certain age that were able to vote. So women didn't have any say in the political decisions that were affecting their own lives. And obviously nowadays we would understand this to be completely unfair. So there was a movement to get women to be able to vote in elections. And so it was called the Women's Suffrage Movement. And the women who took part in that were known as suffragettes. They campaigned for women to have this right. So the National Union of Women's Suffrage, known as the Suffragist Movement, was founded by a woman called Millicent Fawcett, and it stipulated that they only meant to use peaceful means of protest. So they might chant, they might stand with placards, they might sign petitions, they might give speeches, have rallies, that kind of thing. So they stipulated they were only going to have peaceful protests. So that was fact number one. Fact number two is that lots of people were quite opposed to women having the vote, so including many women, surprisingly enough, because they didn't believe that it was correct for women to have the vote, and they campaigned against the extension of the right to women, because a lot of people would argue that women were too emotional to vote in elections. Some people said that they didn't have the intelligence to be able to vote in elections. Other people said that the political decisions didn't affect the lives of women, all of which we know is completely untrue. So it was quite an interesting fact, I thought, that even some women thought that women shouldn't have the vote, because all the men used to just do all of the household stuff. They used to pay the bills. They're the ones that used to go out to work, and so political decisions used to affect things like work. Because women weren't working, or women of a certain income bracket, if they married rich, because there was a lot of working class women who didn't have the vote, they used to believe that they didn't need to vote because none of the things that affected them was a political decision. So that was fact number two. Fact number three is that after peaceful methods of campaigning had failed to bring about any kind of result or change, the movement became a little bit more violent. And so the Women's Social and Political Union, or Suffragette Movement, so we've moved from the suffragists to the Suffragette Movement, was founded by Emmeline Pankhurst, and its tactics were a bit more violent and were viewed by a lot of people as being quite unladylike. So fact number four is that Emmeline's and her daughters, so that was Christabel and Sylvia Pankhurst, were from a wealthy family, but there were many women from middle class families and working class backgrounds were also involved in the fight for the vote. So all throughout society there were lots of women who were fighting to get women being able to vote in elections. Fact number five is about some of the methods that they used in order to protest. So some suffragettes handcuffed themselves to railings. So they would put one handcuff around their own wrist, they would chain it to the railing of a shop, sometimes it was a police station, sometimes it was outside MPs' houses, that kind of thing. They would chain themselves to railings and would have to be physically removed by the authorities. And some of them broke shop windows in order to get the police to arrest them because they wanted to draw attention to the fact of why they were doing it. So if somebody's chained themselves to a railing or if someone's broke a shop window, what's going to happen? It's going to appear in the paper, eh? So obviously they're going to get a lot of attention for their cause to get it in the newspaper because of what these women were doing, misbehaving in the eyes of society. Fact number 6 is that when women were imprisoned, so when they were put in jail, a lot of them went on hunger strike, which would mean that they would refuse any food or drink. And they would have to be force-fed food but through a tube. Horrible, horrible thing to happen to them. So they were doing it, again, to draw attention to their cause. So this led to allegations of police brutality, and it created a lot of sympathy for the suffragettes. So these brave, incredible women were declining any food, and the police were force-feeding them through tubes. Horrible. But it gained a lot of attention and a lot of respect and a lot of sympathy for the suffragettes. Fact number 7 is that there's a thing called the Cat and Mouse Act, and this was enacted in 1913. And the Cat and Mouse Act was when it allowed the police to release the women from prison when they became ill, and then they were able to rearrest them once they'd gained strength and recovered from their illness. So if a woman was in prison and she was refusing food, rather than force feeding them, they had the Cat and Mouse Act in the sense that they would release those women who were refusing food. That woman would go back home, she would eat, again her protest would end, and then the police would rearrest them and put them back in jail. All right, Jane, talking about the suffragettes, thank you very much for joining us. Fact number 8 is about another incredible woman called Emily Wilding Davison. And now she did a couple of things that she's really famous for that got a lot of attention and made a lot of change. One of which was that she hid in the Houses of Parliament illegally during the night of the 1911 census. And a census is when people used to go around houses and find out who was living in which house so they could get a record of how many people were in the country, how old they were, that kind of thing, so they get an idea about the population of the UK. Now, Emily Wilding Davison broke into the Houses of Parliament and she hid in a cupboard, tiny cupboard, throughout the night so that she could claim on the night of the census that her residence was the House of Commons, and as such she could claim the same rights as men because she got the political rights of men because she was in the House of Commons and that was her residence. And here's a little fact 8B. I've actually been in that cupboard. Incredible. It's tiny. They keep all their servers in there nowadays and there's a little plaque to her. It's great. Fact number 9 is that Emily Wilding Davison is probably most famous for becoming a martyr. And what a martyr is, it means that somebody who died for their cause. So they've got a reason for their death. So when Emily Wilding Davison is most famous for stepping out in front of the King's horse in the 1913 Derby. So the Derby was a big race, and the King owned a horse that was taking part in that race with a jockey on it. And Emily Wilding Davison stepped over the railings out onto the racecourse. And there's some people who believe that she wanted to just step out in front of the horse to draw attention to their cause. Others believe she was trying to pin the suffragette colours to the horse's bridle so that when it crossed over the line it would have the suffragette colours attached to it. But unfortunately she was hit by that horse and other horses and died. And so the movement got its first martyr when Emily Wilding Davison was killed by the King's horse. Fact number 10 is about the fact. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is that Millicent Fawcett, the lady who I mentioned at the very start, who created the Suffragist Movement, she is famous for writing the quote, "Courage calls to courage everywhere." And she wrote that upon hearing of Emily Wilding Davison's death. And now there's a big statue to Millicent Fawcett outside the whole Houses of Parliament, and underneath it, I think she's holding a banner that has got that "Courage calls to courage everywhere" on that statue. Fact number 10 is that the crucial role played by women during the First World War persuaded the Prime Minister at the time, David Lloyd George, to grant female householders over the age of 30 the right to vote in 1918. So in 1918, certain women were able to then vote in political elections. But obviously, it wasn't all women, and if you didn't own a house, you couldn't vote again. So female householders over the age of 30 were able to vote in elections, and it wasn't until 1928 that women gained the vote on exactly the same terms as men in the UK. So, those are my 10 facts about the suffragette movement. Thank you very much for joining me. Tomorrow, our topic is going to be completely different, and I want us to find out 10 facts all about Stonehenge. So, see what you can find out. You might have some knowledge already. You might have some books at home you can look it up in, or you can get an adult to help you look it up on the internet. If you've got a fact about women's suffrage that I don't give, stick it in the comments below. Or if you've got a topic that you'd like to challenge me on, get an adult to stick that in the comments as well. So for the meantime, stay home, stay safe, stay creative, and I'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock for 10 facts all about Stonehenge. See you then. Ta-ra a bit. Thanks very much.